2010. So we'll be celebrating 10 years as an alumni this fall. I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I co-own with two other therapists a practice called CULTIVATE, a counseling collective. We have two locations, one in University Heights and one in La Mesa. And it really what it is a psychotherapy practice for marriage and family therapists. We have licensed clinical counselors, associate therapists, a life coach, some social workers. I think there's about 15 of us in whole now between the two locations. I am also a mom of two. I have a daughter, Rosie, who's 4 years old, and my son, Luke, is a year and a half. And I'm also wife to Matt Wilson, who's also an alumni of 2008. He also teaches in the theology department at Point Loma. He teaches Old Testament and New Testament theology, and is a pastor at San Diego First Church as well. All that to say that we are pretty well connected still at Point Loma, between Matt being a pastor at our neighboring church. I adjunct as well in the School of Psychology for Psychology of Personal Development. My husband in the theology department. Our daughter goes to the ECLC, the preschool on campus. And even from the years of 2013 to 2017, my husband was a resident director at Hendricks Hall, which made Hendricks the first home we brought our daughter to. It's kind of fun for me as I think about maybe the potential of her going to Point Loma one day and knowing that she was actually brought home in a carrier to Hendricks Hall for the first time. All that to say, it kind of makes us a little bit unashamed Loma lingerers, but we just love Point Loma so much, and really special for me to be able to give back in this way to the Point Loma community. So a little bit more about myself at Point Loma. I started at Point Loma in 2006, and originally I was an education major at Point Loma. It wasn't until my summer between my freshman year and my sophomore year, I was actually on a road trip with a friend, and she asked me why I was looking forward to being a therapist, or no, why I was looking forward to being a teacher. And what I shared with her was that I was really looking forward to growing my students and the one-on-one relationships with them, to which she then responded, "That sounds a lot more like a therapist than a teacher." And so I took that to heart, and when I started my sophomore year, I jumped back into a psychology class for the first time, having no context of psychology or therapy up until that point, and almost immediately realized that this is exactly where I was meant to be. So a really special moment of vocation and calling at Point Loma in therapy. It's also really fun for me, though, getting to teach at Point Loma, and recognizing that kind of full circle, I was still able to become a teacher later as well. So from there, around my senior year, I was in Dr. Wu's class, marriage and family therapy class. If anyone's been in that class, it's lovely and wonderful. And I was learning about this type of therapy called emotionally focused couples therapy. At the time, I was also engaged or about to be engaged to my husband, Matt, and we actually started doing some of that work in our relationship, and realized that the transformative work that it was so impactful for me that I decided that I wanted to go to grad school to become a therapist. So I asked Dr. Wu who he suggested that I go study under, and he pulled a book off of his shelf and pointed to a therapist at Fuller Theological Seminary to go study under. And so I, like a good student, applied, got in. Matt actually also applied in the Fuller program, got in for Masters of Divinity. We got married the summer after I graduated, and then headed on up to Pasadena to study at Fuller, me for marriage and family therapy, and him for his Masters of Divinity. So that is how I started to move through Point Loma. Obviously, Point Loma and professors at Point Loma have been such a big part of my journey. And now kind of leading into how CULTIVATE was started, after we graduated from Fuller, I got back down to San Diego to work in private practice there. And it was at this practice, San Diego Institute for Couples and Families. It's a practice in Mission Valley in San Diego that I met two other therapists that were there, Bethany and Ingvild. And we, through our years as an associate, through our first kind of years as in private practice, we started to talk a little bit about what it would look like for us to have our own practice one day. And one of the things that we kept coming back to over and over and over again is the idea of really dignifying our clients, wanting to create a space of warmth for them. And so the tagline started to become a warm and inspiring path to wholeness. Then shortly after that, the name Cultivate kind of came up, and then we started getting the ball rolling on looking for a space. First found this space in University Heights in 2017, and then in 2018 we got our space on La Mesa Boulevard as well. One of the kind of prize moments for me was maybe a few years ago, I had a client who was bringing his son in with him to therapy the first time, and his son was feeling really anxious and nervous about coming. And as they walked up the stairs, the little boy said, "Oh, Daddy, this isn't a doctor's office, this is a home." And for us, it's just been such a cool, like we've heard that many times now, clients feeling like this is a space of warmth and home for them. And that's exactly what we set out to do. So that's kind of how Cultivate came to be. But truly so much of what was inspired for Cultivate came from my time at Point Loma. Knowing that feeling of feeling at home, feeling the warmth and inspiration as I was kind of led in this direction. And I attribute so much of that vision of here at Cultivate to my time and experience at Point Loma as well, and through the psychology department to where we are now. So that's a little bit of my story. Cultivate does some really cool things as well. One of the things that we do is community events. We actually have a community event coming up in July. It's a webinar on the intersectionality between mental health and the work of anti-racism. We're going to be learning from some really important Black advocacy members and therapists in the field right now who are going to be with Cultivate and being able to share a little bit about what that work looks like. So we're so excited about that. It's kind of a little taste of some of the things that we do here at Cultivate for our community. And I think that's about it for Cultivate stuff, at least in my journey through Point Loma. So going into, Chelsea, would it be okay for me to head into the next section?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
And everybody, as you have questions about anything that she might have just said or, this kind of next section, feel free to put questions in the chat box.
Awesome. Okay, well, so I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to share today. And one of the things that kept coming up for me is this idea of how to sit with yourself. Obviously, whether it's in the work that we're doing over this year, what I'm finding and what we're obviously seeing is that there are a lot of things that are coming up for people mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And I am finding that being able to sit with myself and teaching my clients how to sit with themselves is one of the most valuable tools that we can have, especially in the intensifying season that we find ourselves in. So I'm going to do a little bit of psychoeducation on what does it look like to sit with yourself? Why is it important to sit with yourself? As well as at the end, us practicing a little bit in actually doing some of that work. So I hope that that's okay with you all. And then again, at the end, we will be taking questions. So if anyone does have any questions or wants to know more particulars, then I'm happy to answer questions at the end too. So one of the things that I was talking about earlier in my interest moving into becoming a therapist is emotionally focused couples therapy. And Emotionally focused couples therapy is generally a type of couples work in which we're teaching people what does it look like to be more securely attached in their relationships. We kind of look at people's past experiences, their early attachment figures, as well as experiencing kind of what do your attachments look like now, whether it's with your partners, with your spouse, family members, coworkers, children, if you have them. It is really important that we start to assess and notice what our attachments look like. And so one of the things that I think is really important is to recognize that there are 3 S's to secure attachment. The first is safety. The second is seen. And the third is soothed. We need to feel safe, seen, and soothed. And we need others in our life, especially our attachment figures, again, such as maybe a spouse or children, to feel from us a sense of being safe, seen, and soothed. So what I'm recognizing and noticing, especially in this season, kind of starting with COVID, as we've expanded, as there is a huge conversation around racial injustice that's going on, in the midst of what feels like a really chaotic and upending year. For some, the safe, seen, and soothed, in shelter in place and being a little bit more slow in the way that we are right now, we're really experiencing that people are able to kind of see each other and soothe each other better than they have ever before, especially in kind of burrowing in a little bit more with your pockets of people. And for others, it's been a real challenge this year to experience feeling safe, seen, and soothed, especially because of job insecurity, anxiety, depression, a rise in addiction, as well as a rise in abuse that's coming out of this year. And so we're also recognizing and seeing that there's some real pain points for people around this idea of feeling safe, seen, and soothed, and being able to show that to others. So the first thing that I want you to do, if you have a piece of paper or a pen, if you can just jot down for yourself, creating safety for others, really seeing others, like really just getting them and letting them know that you see them, you're watching them, you're paying attention to them, and soothing. Being able to be a calming, warm presence to others, to love and care well, to attune when things are hard. Which of those do you notice in yourself is hard to give to others? Which one feels the trickiest? And then I want you to ask yourself the question with what would it look like, or how does it look for you to want to give that not only to others but also to receive that? Is there one that you're looking to receive a little bit more in some of those relationships? So being aware of where are those spaces where we can shore up our attachments and our connections with those around us, especially at a time like this. So as we're kind of talking a little bit about our relationships and feeling that sense of being safe, seen, and soothed, I wanted to share a little metaphor that I share with my clients a lot of the time. And it's the idea that our emotions are actually a lot like children. One of the things that I think is a really helpful theory to think about is that while our cognitions and our mature, as we kind of age and mature, we can kind of grow mentally, but for our emotions, they kind of stay small. They stay ageless. And I'm sure that many of you, I'm hoping it's not just myself, find ourselves even in moments having these emotional reactions that remind us a lot of maybe what they look like as toddlers, as children. And I think that that's the perfect backdrop to recognize that our emotions and what our emotions need are a lot like the needs of children. So one of the ways that I like to think about it is when thinking about your emotions, I want us to think about if you are either a parent, maybe a grandparent, if you babysat, if you have younger siblings, then intuitively you might know kind of the answer to this. But when children need something from us, when they have a request, they share something they need, they show that they need something, and we're like, I'm sorry, I don't have time for you right now, maybe later. Sorry, I'm busy, right? Like when we kind of push them off and kind of show that we don't have time to spend with them, what do kids do? Do they go away? Generally. So even though it's muted right now, I'm imagining that for a lot of you, you're kind of remembering or very clearly recognizing that kids just get louder, right? Like they demand to make their needs known. They demand to kind of show what their needs are. And that's a lot like our emotions inside of us. Our emotions so often when we say, I'm sorry, I don't have time for you, go away, not now, I don't deal with that kind of stuff, go to somebody else, go somewhere else, that the only thing our emotions know how to do, just like kids, is to get louder, to get a little bit more complicated. And one of the things that I think is really important to do in the therapy room and to help do this with my clients and help them to do this with themselves is when we can do exactly what a child would need in that moment, maybe, metaphorically to kind of get on our knees and say, hey, what do you need? What's going on right now for you? So often it's like, I need a cup of water, right? Or like, I got a boo-boo, or I want to show you this picture I drew. It's not always even as big a request or even as time-consuming a request as we think it's going to be. And yet, just our simple ability to just lean in and ask, what do you need? How can I be there for you? I see you. Gives our emotions the ability to move through our body. I really love the quote, emotions are like tunnels. We kind of need to see them all the way through. And often it's when we kind of push them away or push them aside that they start to get a bit bigger. And that's a big part of the work that I do at Cultivate and just with my clients, is helping them to kind of lean in to that space. We've been told through, I think, a lot of different venues that that's not something that we do. Emotions are complicated. They're not helpful. I think if you, particularly if you're a male, then you might have gotten some messages around emotion and emotionality, and if that is good or bad. I think even as Christians, we hear it a lot. Do not be anxious, or quick to kind of like slough it off with a verse or something that kind of quickly kind of pushes it away. But what I think I learned in the work that I do, even as a Christian, is how much Jesus did the work to lean in, and how much we're able to kind of do that for ourselves, and how successful it is when we are able to do that for ourselves. So another thing that I'm really noticing and recognizing for people is that oftentimes we think that we have to make the feeling better, but so often our feelings don't necessarily need to feel better. They just need to know that they make sense. They just kind of need to recognize and be aware that it's okay for them to exist and be inside of us. And another thing that I've recognized really strongly in my practice, especially over this last year, is that there are so many people who it's not the emotion, the like initial emotion that's complicated. It's the feelings we have about the feelings. So it's like the shame that we put on top of the sadness because we don't think we're allowed to feel sad. It's the anger that we put on top of the feeling of fear because we don't want to do that, or we think we're better than that, or old enough to know better, or feel, discomfort with that feeling. And so it gets really complicated when we then start to put judgments on the emotions and the feelings that we have. And so again, being able to just sit with the emotion and recognize it as not good or bad, right or wrong, just there, is such an opportunity that we have to kind of cut the complication and to just give space to let our feelings and our emotions just move right through us. So that's a little bit about feelings. One of the things there's a quote that I really like from Brene Brown as well. And it's kind of a little bit more specific to even this time. One of the things that I was really noticing and seeing, especially when COVID kind of hit in March, especially when shelter in place started to come up and people were now, burrowing into their homes. And one of the things I was really seeing from clients is this idea that they felt guilty, that it felt hard for them. They felt guilty or shame that they didn't really have reason if they had job security. If you felt like you at least had people in your home rather than being on your own. I had kind of clients on both ends, like at least I don't have kids. At least I don't have kids and I don't have to do that part of it, being stuck at home with my kids. And then on the other hand, I had singles feeling guilty for, not having kids. And then people who had kids feeling guilty that they did have kids. So I think everyone felt like my experience or my pain is not worth even honoring because it's not like somebody else, X, Y, and Z. Brene Brown said this, and I think it's just stuck with me a lot in this time. She said, it's okay to be safe, have enough food, be with the people you love, and still be disappointed, because denying your disappointment doesn't make you more empathetic. It makes you less empathetic, because we have to own our own feelings, no matter how big or small, to be empathetic. And I just really love that reframe. That idea that in order to really truly be empathic to the world, we have to kind of start inward. So remembering again, what does that look like to be empathic, and how can we do that and do the work of that inside of ourselves first. Another thing that I really love the idea of when it comes to our feelings and looking inside is, if you're able to, many of you have probably seen the movie Inside Out, and the ways in which the emotions inside that little girl, Riley, and how they kind of interact and talk to each other. And I actually think that that's a really great way to get to know yourself a little bit more as well. I really believe in multiplicity inside of us, which is the idea that we are not just one stagnant person, but that we have many different parts of ourselves that kind of come out at certain seasons. I think you probably recognize that in yourself in times of stress. You might find that you have this like different kind of edge to you. And it's different than when you feel more relaxed or a little bit more yourself. We have child parts that come up inside of us. We have other past wounds or traumas and the parts of us that kind of stay there. And it's really important, I think, to start to recognize that you are not just a singular person, but made up of these different parts of ourselves that kind of come out and interact with us and interact with each other. And even in being able to kind of notice and take stock of like some of those parts inside of you, whether they're emotions or just different personality traits, it can be a really helpful way for you to start to do some of that inner work of healing. I really love the quote by Robert Frost, "The best way out is through." And again, it's the idea that we would take a kind of a curious stance with our emotions, and that we would lean in to the emotion in order to get on the other side of it. Even though maybe the shortcut or the way around feels a little bit more safe, being able to move through ourselves is really important. One thing that I'm really noticing with clients, and certainly doing this work myself, is as the conversation and as there are, especially the United States is really being impacted right now around racial injustice. We're talking a lot about it. I think it's really important that we are. But I'm also noticing that for some, hopefully all of us in some ways, we're also holding this tension or recognizing some of the ways in which we have implicit biases, or realize that we have things within ourselves that kind of contribute to some of the pain points of people of color. And one of the ways that I think is really important is to do that same work of just figuring out what it looks like to lean in and sit in the discomfort. To lean in and to sit with our discomfort, to be really soothing again to those parts of you that are coming up, or to the emotions that are coming up, and to just keep a stance of curiosity for those parts as they come. I think that that's a really important way for you to kind of sit in the tension. I like to think of it like a therapy session for some of you who have been in therapy before, or maybe just like had a really hard conversation with someone and you walked away kind of feeling that like, maybe that like buzzy discomfort, or like, whoa, something just landed for me. Have you had that before, right? Like something is just really sitting in there. And what would it look like for you to allow that tension to be there, to allow that even the discomfort to be there, but then to start to like sift it through a little bit more? Can you sift out the shame? Sift out the shame of even having the thoughts or feelings that you're having, and allow then to just have that discomfort seep inside in a way that transforms us. That's really how we do the transformational work, is through being able to sit in tension. And so while for some I'm kind of saying lean into the emotion, for some that sounds probably easy, and you've probably been doing that your whole life. And for others, that feels really scary and really dangerous. And I would like to note just for a moment that for some, maybe it is dangerous. That certainly when it comes to severe depression and suicidal ideation, leaning in and what that might do to someone's trauma that's been unresolved, that those are the moments, and there's plenty of other experiences. I think therapy is for everybody, but those are the moments when it might be helpful and would be helpful for you to maybe to go see a therapist, maybe to be able to start to move through the ability to do that inner work alongside a safe other who can kind of guide you through that and be with you in that process. And so I just wanted to make that little plug as a therapist, wanting to be ethical, that for so many we can do this and we can kind of sit in that work and sit in that tension and kind of ask ourselves some of these questions, be more soothing, be more caring for ourselves. And for others, it might be best that we lean in and have someone, especially a professional, alongside that journey for us in order to really get to do that work. So I think in a few minutes we're going to take questions, but I would like for us, if we can, to just maybe take a moment to practice. A few weeks ago, had a post through Point Loma Alumni, their Instagram page, about 5 ways that you can kind of lean into the emotion. Notice it, pay attention to it, allow it to kind of move through you, and to practice what that looks like, to let that move through you, and to let that be a way that not only we know a little bit more about ourselves, but also to de-stress, because buildup of emotion looks like stress. It's cortisol in our body, and it's not good for us, especially not right now. So I wanted for us to do a little mindfulness meditation today, where I could kind of lead us through the practice of recognizing what's going on inside of us. So I think most people don't have their video on. For those that do have your video on, you're welcome to leave it on, or if you want to take it off video so that you can kind of comfortably close your eyes. I'm probably also going to close my eyes for part of the time too. But let's start to move into that work a little bit for a moment. So if you can, go ahead and just find a really comfortable place inside of you. Wiggle around a little bit, get comfortable. Close your eyes. Find yourself taking a few deep breaths. In through your nose, out through your mouth. And I want you to just get into a stance of curiosity. Curiosity about what's going on inside of you today. If there's an emotion that you can recognize and name, go ahead and just to yourself name that emotion. Now I want you to just be curious about where that emotion, or if you haven't recognized an emotion yet, noticing if there's anything that you're recognizing is going on in your body right now. Let's do a little scan from head to toe and see if that emotion is residing in a certain place in your body. For those that can't identify an emotion, is there anything going on in your body? Is there a heaviness on your chest? Maybe some tingling in your stomach or on your limbs, tension in your shoulders, or your back. So as you start to recognize where some of that tension is in your body, or whatever that feeling is, something going on there, I want you to think of an image for what that looks like inside. Is there a metaphor or an image that you can put to that sensation in your body? Maybe you can't think of a metaphor or an image, but maybe you can even just think of a color. Now I just want you to stay with that feeling wherever it is, and just stay curious. No judgment. Just be with it for a moment. And now in that space of curiosity, I just want you to ask either that feeling or that place in your body where you're experiencing some kind of tension, some kind of bodily experience, the question, what message are you wanting me to hear today? What are you wanting to tell me? Now, if you can, even go ahead and just take your hands and just even find yourself just soothing that part. If it's your stomach, maybe to put a light hand on your stomach, maybe a steady pressure on your chest. If it's in your shoulders, you can even give your shoulders a little squeeze. Wherever that is, to find some way to acknowledge and soothe that part. And we can remind that tension, that feeling, that we see it, that we're here, to thank it for sharing with you today. And just take another moment after you do that to just give yourselves a few more breaths in and out. And then when you're ready, you can open back up your eyes, turn on your cameras if you want to turn back on your cameras, keep them off, whatever feels comfortable to you. Now just take a moment to just notice if anything feels different inside. Is there less tension or discomfort where you initially acknowledge that? Are you more aware now of what that part in your body was maybe wanting to tell you or communicate with you? Is there an emotion maybe that was coming up that you weren't fully sure was there until maybe you did step into your body and feel into to that and maybe learned that an emotion was in there that you didn't even know was there? I do want to thank you all so much for allowing me to get to walk you through some of those steps again today. As I said earlier, there was a post a few weeks ago on the Point Loma Alumni Instagram page that kind of laid out those steps if you want to go back and just have them for yourself. But I thought it could be helpful for us today to actually just do a little bit of that work and sit with that. And to maybe ask you, what would it look like if you were to give yourself, I don't know how much time we spent on that, 5 minutes a day to just check in? Sometimes it's through the emotion center, like we know what we're feeling. Other times we are a little bit more familiar with our body instead, so our body is able to give us that signal. Sometimes it's our head and our cognition that are giving us that. So whether it's through the head, the heart, or the body, there's a lot of different ways that we can allow those things, such as body tension and emotion, to link up and to share with us even more information. So again, I really recommend maybe spending more time there and to stay curious about the emotions that are coming up for you as they come. Chelsea and Kimberly, I did want to open it up to if anyone has any questions or thoughts, or even if you wanted to share a little bit about what you were noticing in that exercise. I'm happy to kind of open it up at this point to questions or comments if there are any.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Yeah, I think we may have a few questions coming in. I don't know if you can see the chat.
Yeah, let me pull it up.
Dr. Zanger might have had a question for you.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So the question is, which one of Brené's books provided you that quote? She has written a number of good and challenging books, which I completely agree. And this one actually came from her podcast, Unlocking Us. And I believe it was, I'm actually just pulling up my podcast now so I can accurately share where it came from. It was on the very first episode that she did on the podcast Unlocking Us, called Brene on FFTs. FFTs was her shorthand for, we'll say, freaking first times. That's not the word that she used, but she said for kids we can say tricky first times, TFTs, and how much that's true for us, especially during this season of COVID and shelter in place, that we were all learning something new for the first time, and speaking about how to be soothing to ourselves during that time. So that's where that quote came from. Although now that we are talking about that podcast really quickly, if I could, there is a really beautiful interview that she did called Permission to Feel by a man named Dr. Mark Brackett. And that was the podcast that she did on April 13th. And I would also really recommend that one as well. If any of this sounded interesting at all or relevant to you, Permission to Feel is a really good add-on there in kind of sitting with our feelings and acknowledging our feelings, especially in seasons like this. So thanks for your question. Okay, and then Chelsea, do you have any other good books, podcast recommendations to share? How much time do you have is my question. And yes, very much so. I really, really think that Brene Brown is a great person to start with. I think that she does a lot of good work. One of the things that I also think is really, honestly, is really important is the Enneagram. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Enneagram or uses the Enneagram, but I often find that the Enneagram is a really awesome tool in getting to kind of be aware of ourselves and even the parts of us that kind of come up. The Enneagram kind of takes this lens that you are not your persona or the personality that you bring in the world, but we've kind of created those things around ourselves. And so I do think the Enneagram is a great tool. The best way to know what your Enneagram type is to head to the Enneagram Institute, which is a website. You can take the test. And I always tell people, after you take the test, I don't want you to look at the top results as what your Enneagram type is, but to look at the top 3 or even 4. And from there, do the research of starting to recognize what your Enneagram type might be. So that has been really helpful. It's really helpful for my clients, but I also do a lot of self-work with the Enneagram as well. So I really enjoyed that one. Chelsea, I can definitely send you a hefty list of other things. Although I will share one that I'm doing right now. I did kind of mention externalizing parts. And what does it look like to kind of recognize the parts of yourselves, just like Inside Out, but inside of you. And there's a really amazing audiobook right now called Greater Than the Sum of Your Parts by Richard Schwartz. Greater Than the Sum of Our Parts by Richard Schwartz. And he moves you through meditations to start to discover some of those parts of yourselves and how they interact. And so it's a really actually amazing way to start to kind of recognize and even create a little bit more recognition for those parts of you and what they're trying to communicate. So I would recommend that one as well. Yeah. How often do you go to Stella Jean? Just walked by the other day and saw your office above. Stella Jean is very, very dangerous. So if you're not familiar with where we are on University Heights, we're on Park Boulevard, above a restaurant called Pop Pie, P-O-P-P-I-E. And then they actually, just a year and a half ago, opened up an ice cream shop that is, their door is kind of a door right next to ours. And it is very dangerous. So Stella Jean is really just the best to have. And truly, I think about it all the time for my clients. After hard sessions, I generally tell them that they deserve an ice cream and to go get one on their way out. So it's been kind of a fun partner to have. I just had a pot pie for lunch, actually. So very convenient. Kimberly said, I love Safe, Seen, and Soothed. Curious if you have any fun, creative ways to personally like to help yourself or others feel soothed particularly. Oh, I love that. Okay, so soothing, safe, seen, and soothe, the 3 S's of secure attachment. The question is around ways that we can help ourselves or others feel soothed. And one of the exercise that I just gave that we did a little bit earlier is a great way to do that. Truly, to be able to just spend time inside of ourselves and be curious without putting judgment is a great way to soothe. The other thing that I wanted to share is that when we experience cortisol in our bodies, one of the ways in which we combat cortisol is through oxytocin. And you can actually create oxytocin in your own body. Even just the ability to rub your hands together. If you rub your hands together and then you place your hand just directly onto your chest right here, even that, you get a shot of oxytocin through being able to just soothe yourself in that way. There was even some research that came out recently talking a little bit about the idea that even your ability to hug yourself or to squeeze yourself is you also experiencing touch as well. One of the other ways that we can kind of be soothing in a physical way is progressive muscle relaxation. So starting with your feet, squeezing from starting with your toes, squeezing your foot, holding as tightly as you can for about 3 seconds, and then releasing, going up to your legs, into your back, into the shoulders and the arms, even to squeeze your entire face and then let it release. All those are great ways to kind of release the tension, but also to kind of soothe as well. Okay, I'm gonna read this most recent question. Would you say that as we grow, our emotions get different needs, like mature per se? I don't know if this makes sense, but kind of like how you would address a kid versus a teenager's needs. What are some tools when our emotions have more complex needs? I can clarify. Okay, so I think I'm understanding the question, and it's a really good one. So the question I think that I'm reading is this idea that like our emotions, like how do we soothe our emotions, especially as they seem a little bit older than kind of the child version of the emotions that come up. We can do that with both. So on the one hand, we can be soothing to our emotions and see them as little children. And then on the other hand, as I kind of talked about, like an inside out, we can have parts of ourselves that come from these different stages of our life. And so even recognizing and getting to understand where those parts kind of come out is one of the ways that we kind of see them as different ages even. So having a childlike part, maybe a teenage self inside of there, if any have experienced trauma, a part of you that's kind of locked in from a trauma experience that you might have experienced. And I do think that obviously as the needs are different in these different parts of us that we have, that even just again doing an exercise like I did or going to therapy is a good way to kind of get curious and understand those parts of us and what their needs might be as different than even to just be safe seeing them and soothing them. Ashley, if you want more clarification, you're welcome to jump in too. And
awesome. Well, okay. I think looks like I think that's all the questions for now. And I know we probably have more as they come, and really just appreciate this time to learn, but then also to be able to sit and exercise this as well. So thank you so much, Lindsay, for this time together. I will be going ahead and sending an email to our participants with some information. Lindsay said that we would be able to send a few things like the Instagram handle, the website, office phone number for CULTIVATE. Is that right, Lindsay?
Yeah,
awesome.
Yes. CULTIVATE San Diego is our website if anyone is looking for therapy. But certainly just if you had extra questions or wanted to have more clarity or resources around some of the stuff we talked about, I'd be so happy to reach out personally to any of you and give you more insight there. Yeah.
So I'll go ahead and send a follow-up email. If you did not have a chance to register on our website, I likely don't have your email and would love if you could send me a private chat where it says to, if you just click instead of everyone, if you put Chelsea Paggio in the chat and send me your email, we'd love to include you on that as well. So if you didn't get a chance to RSVP on our website, I'd love to get your email so that we can send you a follow-up. Just with some of these recommendations that that Lindsay was able to provide for us over the time. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Lindsay. This was really, really wonderful. And we encourage you to jump on to our future Loma talks. Next week we have Kevin Christensen, who I think is here today, and Anna Vitry will be providing some information on finances and aligning those with our values, and we have some really exciting things coming up. So thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate you being here, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good Wednesday. Thanks, you two, so much for having me.
Yeah, that was awesome. I will go ahead and reach out to you, Lindsay. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to go ahead and end this now.
All right, see ya.
Awesome.